The rain fell in sheets that November evening, turning the city streets into rivers of reflected neon and broken dreams. Most people hurried past the small figure huddled beneath the awning of the closed bookstore, their umbrellas like shields against not just the weather, but against seeing what they didn't want to see. A child, alone, shivering in clothes too thin for the season, clutching a cardboard sign that read simply, "Hungry, anything helps." God bless. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, with tangled dark hair that hung in wet ribbons around her face, and eyes that had seen far too much for someone who should have been worried about homework and playground games. Her name was Sophie, though no one bothered to ask. To the thousands who passed her each day, she was invisible, just another unfortunate statistic in a city full of them. But on this particular evening, someone finally stopped, and nothing would ever be the same. Marcus Chen had been having the worst day of his life, which was saying something considering the year he'd endured. 6 months ago, his wife had died suddenly from an aneurysm, leaving him alone to raise their 4-year-old daughter, Lily. He'd lost his job 3 weeks later when the company downsized, and despite his master's degree in engineering, he couldn't find work that paid enough to cover both rent and childcare. Today he'd received an eviction notice. They had 30 days. He was walking back from another failed job interview, his daughter's hand warm in his despite the cold, when Lily suddenly stopped walking. She was staring at something across the street, her little face scrunched up in that expression she got when she was thinking hard about something important. "Daddy," she said quietly, "that girl looks cold." Marcus followed her gaze to the small figure beneath the awning. His first instinct was to keep walking, to protect his daughter from the harsh realities of the world a little longer. He had his own problems, his own child to feed, the $73 in his wallet needed to last until he figured something out. But Lily was already tugging him across the street, her hand slipping from his as she approached the huddled girl with the fearless compassion that only children possess. "Hi," Lily said brightly, crouching down to meet the older girl's eyes. "I'm Lily. Are you okay?" Sophie looked up, startled. People didn't usually talk to her. They pretended not to see her, or worse, they saw her and looked away anyway. But this little girl with the pink raincoat and matching boots was smiling at her like she was someone worth smiling at. "I'm okay," Sophie whispered, though they both knew it was a lie. Marcus caught up, ready to gently pull Lily away, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the way Sophie looked at his daughter, with such longing, such hunger for simple kindness. Maybe it was the way her hands trembled as she tried to smooth down her wet hair, a gesture of dignity in the face of impossible circumstances. Or maybe it was just that he'd been so focused on his own pain that he'd forgotten the most important lesson. His wife had taught him, no matter how little you have, there's always someone who has less. "When did you eat last?" he heard himself asking. Sophie's eyes widened. "Yesterday morning. A lady gave me half a sandwich." Marcus felt something crack open in his chest. Yesterday morning. He thought about the peanut butter and jelly sandwich he'd made Lily for lunch, the apple slices, the juice box, things he'd taken for granted, even in his own desperation. "Come on," he said, making a decision that his practical mind screamed was foolish. "There's a diner around the corner. You like pancakes?" Sophie stared at him like he'd just offered her the moon. "Really?" "Really, but we should get out of this rain first." The three of them hurried to Mel's Diner, a 24-hour establishment that had seen better decades but served breakfast all day and didn't ask questions. They slid into a red vinyl booth, Sophie sitting stiffly as if afraid to touch anything, Lily bouncing excitedly beside her father. "Order whatever you want," Marcus told Sophie, handing her a laminated menu sticky with syrup and thyme. She looked at it like it was written in a foreign language, her eyes scanning the prices with visible anxiety. I don't have any money." "I didn't ask if you had money. I asked what you wanted to eat." When the food came, pancakes and eggs and bacon and hash browns, more food than Sophie had seen in weeks, she started crying. Not loud sobs, but silent tears that rolled down her cheeks as she stared at the plate. "What's wrong?" Lily asked, concerned. "Don't you like pancakes?" "I love pancakes," Sophie whispered. Thank you. Thank you so much." Marcus had to look away, his own eyes burning. When was the last time he'd cried? At the funeral, probably. He'd been so focused on being strong for Lily, on holding everything together, that he'd forgotten how to let himself feel. As Sophie ate, slowly at first, then with the desperate hunger of someone who didn't know when the next meal might come, she began to talk. Her story spilled out between bites. A story that made Marcus's problems feel suddenly smaller. Her mother had died when she was 5. Her father had tried, but the grief and the responsibility broke him, and he'd started drinking. Then came the drugs. Then came the day he didn't come home at all. Sophie had been living on the streets for 3 weeks. Before child services found her, she'd spent 2 years bouncing between foster homes, each one worse than the last. The most recent family had locked her in a closet when she wet the bed. She'd run away 4 days ago and had been surviving on the streets ever since. "I'm 8.5, she said matter-of-factly, as if that explained everything. "I'm smart. I can read real good. I just need someone to give me a chance." Lily had abandoned her own food and was holding Sophie's hand across the table, her little face serious and sad. "You can stay with us," she announced. "Right, Daddy. She can sleep in my room." Marcus felt the weight of impossibility pressing down on him. He was about to be evicted. He couldn't even take care of his own daughter properly. How could he possibly help this child? But then Sophie did something that changed everything. As they were getting ready to leave, she turned to Marcus with an expression of such vulnerable hope that it nearly broke him. "Can you give me a hug, please?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I haven't had a hug in a really long time." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. This child, who had survived abandonment and abuse and neglect, who had learned to make herself small and invisible just to survive, was asking for something so simple, so human, so basic that most people never even thought about it. He knelt down, and Sophie walked into his arms like someone stepping into sunlight after years in darkness. She was so small, so fragile, and she held on to him like he was the only solid thing in a world that had proven itself to be nothing but quicksand. He felt her shoulders shake with silent sobs, felt the way she clutched at his jacket, and something inside him that had been locked away since his wife died finally broke open. He was crying too, he realized. For Sophie, for Lily, for himself, for everyone who'd ever felt alone and afraid and invisible. Lily wrapped her small arms around both of them, and they stood there in the diner, 3 broken people holding each other together. "You're not alone anymore," Marcus whispered into Sophie's hair. "I don't know how we're going to do this, but you're not alone." What happened next seemed like a miracle, though Marcus would later insist it was just the universe finally balancing the scales. The owner of the diner, Mel himself, had been watching the whole scene. He was a gruff 70-year-old Korean, war veteran who claimed he didn't have a sentimental bone in his body, but he walked over and slid into the booth across from them. "You got a job?" he asked Marcus bluntly. "Not yet, but I'm looking." "You got one now. Night manager. Pays enough to cover rent somewhere decent, and it comes with free meals. You can bring the girls. They can do homework in the back booth." He looked at Sophie. "You too. You're part of this now." Marcus stared at him, unable to speak. "Don't make me repeat myself," Mel grumbled. "I'm getting old. Need someone I can trust to run this place when I'm not here. You look like someone who understands what it means to show up." He paused, his eyes softening just slightly. "Plus, any man who stops to help a kid who's not his own, when he's got his own troubles, that's the kind of person I want working for me." The job saved them. But more than that, the job gave Marcus purpose again. He worked hard, showed up early, stayed late. Within 3 months, Mel made him a partner. Within 6 months, they'd opened a second location. But none of that mattered as much as what happened with Sophie. Marcus became her foster parent, then her adoptive father. It took time, mountains of paperwork, court dates, home visits, and more patience than he knew he possessed. But 14 months after that rainy November night, Sophie officially became Sophie Chen, Lily's sister. His daughter. On the day the adoption was finalized, they celebrated at the diner. Mel made a cake that was slightly lopsided, but covered in so much frosting that nobody cared. Sophie wore a new dress, the first new dress she'd ever owned, and she couldn't stop smiling. "Make a wish," Marcus told her as she leaned over the candles. Sophie closed her eyes, and when she opened them, they were bright with happy tears. "I don't need to," she said. "Everything I wished for already came true." Years later, Marcus would tell this story whenever someone asked him about kindness, about helping others, about why he volunteered at the homeless shelter every weekend, and why he'd started a foundation that helped single parents find employment and housing. He'd tell them about a little girl who asked for a hug and changed his life forever. "I thought I was saving her," he'd say, his arm around a confident young woman who'd grown into someone extraordinary, a college student, studying social work, determined to help other kids like she'd been. But the truth is, she saved me. She reminded me what it means to be human, to see people, to reach out even when you're scared, even when you're hurting, even when you think you have nothing left to give. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask for help. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is say yes. The rain still falls on city streets. People still hurry past things they don't want to see. But somewhere, because one man stopped long enough to notice, 2 daughters sleep safely in warm beds. And a child who once asked a stranger for a hug learned that the world, despite everything, can still be full of love.